There is a sense amongst a lot of Russians that they know they're being lied to by their government. It's worth noting, for example, BBC World Service Russian language. At a time when so many of the foreign language services are actually losing audiences, it is actually picking up a lot more of a market share, shall we say, in Russia, simply as people are just desperate to try and find out what's really going on. So yes, I mean, in so many ways, not just the obvious ones of sanctions and people dying, this war is actually proving very, very corrosive to the whole Putin regime.
Now, one of the reasons why Vladimir Putin retains support in Russia is because he's seen as ending the chaos of the 1990s after the fall of communism. Politics became so unstable, gangs rang the economy, and ordinary Russians got poorer and sicker. Are things now spiralling out of control in a similar way? Some in Russia think so. Professor Mark Galeotti was in Russia in the 90s and has studied organised crime for years and joins us. Mark, good morning.
Hello there.
What we sort of associate that car bombs, lawlessness, sort of the Russian public believing in things like sort of psychic healers. To what extent do you think that right now Russia is revisiting what was sort of quite wild in the 1990s?
There's elements of it. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to be the classic academic and sort of become all very sort of finicky. Look, on the one hand, we've seen a very substantial increase in crime, armed and violent crime, and organized crime, all of which are very much features of the 1990s. But there's two key differences. One of them is in the 1990s, the state had virtually collapsed. The state is, in some ways, depressingly still very strong in Russia. And secondly, is that the 1990s were a period of massive poverty for almost all Russians. You would see this depressing sight of, a handful of newly rich fat cats in their brand new bulletproof Mercedes limousines purring through the streets, whereas outside every metro station in Moscow, there will be a line of pensioners desperately selling anything they had. And it was truly pathetic, a half-used tube of toothpaste, a single shoe, whatever they had, simply because their pensions had been pretty much wiped out. So yes, we have a lot more chaos and violence and a lot more signs of a society under pressure, hence like the things like the sort of reliance on psychics and everything else. But the context is a lot more stable than it was in that really rather terrible decade.
Yeah, you wonder how much this has got to do with the Russian reality of living through its war with Ukraine, coming up to a third anniversary. To what extent, when people are seeing things like, convicts, people returning home in body bags, how much is Putin's sort of grip that he has had such a vice on for the last few decades? How much is that slipping and corroding?
Yeah, this is absolutely crucial because it's not just simply the obvious signs of war. It's also the uncertainties. You never know if there's going to be another mobilization wave, and is your husband, your brother, your dad, or whatever going to be whisked up and sent to the war. There's a sort of a strange process whereby goods which were once sort of commonly available are now no longer available, or you have to sort of pay for them on the black market. And perhaps most kind of corrosive of all, there is a sense amongst a lot of Russians that they know they're being lied to by their government. It's worth noting, for example, BBC World Service Russian language. At a time when so many of the foreign language services are actually losing audiences, it is actually picking up a lot more of a market share, shall we say, in Russia, simply as people are just desperate to try and find out what's really going on. So yes, I mean, in so many ways, not just the obvious ones of sanctions and people dying, this war is actually proving very, very corrosive to the whole Putin regime.
And corrosive to what extent? We've seen sort of organised crime taking over in some pockets of Russia. To what extent could that actually provide a force that could take on Putin? I mean, is that just beyond the realm of possibility?
I mean, for the moment, the answer is yes. I mean, it's an exciting scenario, but it is because, in effect, the state is still the biggest gang in town. Wherever it wants to focus its efforts, it has more men and more guns and more will to be able to do so. And we see that sometimes. We've seen it, for example, recently in the North Caucasus, where things look a little bit out of control. So essentially, the state decided, we're going to tighten our grip for a while. So it's not actually that this is in itself going to sort of topple Putin's regime or anything like that. What it though is a symptom. It's a symptom of this growing sense that something is not right, that one way or the other, Russia is not heading in the direction that most people want, that the state is distracted, that Putin, who is after all getting older and certainly not showing himself anywhere near as politically nimble as once he was, is no longer quite so easy to get in control of things. And most crucially, that in some ways, even the local structures of the state are beginning to get corrupted to the point where they're actually sort of more or less Moscow. They're not going to challenge Putin, but what they are going to do is just basically steal what they can, do what they can, and try and ignore Moscow as far as they can. This is more like what we saw in the Soviet Union in the 1970s and early 1980s, as it was beginning to slide towards an eventual decay.
Mark, thank you so much. Russia expert and Times writer Mark Galeotti saying, still, the state is the biggest gang in town.
Здравствуйте. Я рад быть в Казани. Прошу.
Нормально. Черт. Вдруг не получается.